If you guys are wondering why I didn't take this linkage off, well, there's a little plastic, piece in there, and that just keeps it from falling out. And I tried to rotate it to the point where it should just slide out, and it's not on its own, so I don't want to break that plastic, so I'm just leaving it. I'm not going to put this in the ultrasonic cleaner because that's an electronic device, so I can see about unthreading it from the bowl itself, but I really don't want to do that in case there's like a sealant on there. So what I'm going to do is just clean this inside up, wipe it down, and put that off to the side. So there you have it, guys. Not much to these carburetors. We got the water heating up in our ultrasonic cleaner, so we'll get that cleaned up. Now, if you don't have an ultrasonic cleaner, which you probably don't, to clean one of these carbs, here's what I suggest. Get a can of carb cleaner, stick the nozzle in there, any holes that you see you want to stick the nozzle in and give it a good spray. If you have a compressor, compressors work awesome for that too. You can put the nozzle on there, hit it with some compressed air, hit the nozzle there, and make sure air's coming out of there. If you have any jets, if you have any screws or any jets that go into the side, you always want to remove those so that you can spray carb cleaner in, and that's just how you clean a carburetor. I also wanted to show you guys that there's a little brass piece in there. If you hit that, you can take that out. It's got a little O-ring on it. You're going to want to make sure that's clean. I know that's clean because you can see through it. So I'm going to put that over there with my other parts. So now we're going to just put this and the carburetor into the ultrasonic cleaner, get that cleaned up. Okay, so we got our carburetor out of the ultrasonic cleaner. It came out really nice, really good job. So first things first, we got everything on a nice clean shop towel here. We're going to get this little guy back into there. So basically just flip this upside down, put that in with the O-ring side down, and then once you get it in, take like a screwdriver and press it in just until it seats in nice. Now we got it in there. You guys can see if I lift that upside down, it will fall out. They only stick when there's gunk on them, because you got to remember that this is what's going to hold that little brass piece up into that plastic. So now what we're going to do is lay our gasket, this gasket right here. We're going to lay that on this piece. We're going to put the O-ring back in there on the bottom, and then we're going to close the two together. Again, you guys are going to want to line these up so that this lines up with this here. And then we're going to basically flip them, put them back in, and get that part taken care of. You guys want to have something like this. Our little brass piece is seated in the bottom there with our gasket now in place on that. Our O-ring is on the carb. So now what you're going to do is you're going to pick this up and you're going to drop it straight down over top of that. Okay, so now that we got that done, should look a little something like that. Again, our lines line up, it's in the right spot. All of our gaskets line up, our O-ring fit. Sometimes you might have a problem, guys, where this plastic piece doesn't want to seat up against your aluminum carburetor. So what you want to do is check that little O-ring, the little O-ring that's on the side there. Sometimes that falls out and you can pinch it. So you just want to check that and make sure that you don't break it. And if you do, you can get something like this. Something like that, guys. Nitrile, O-ring assortment, metric, and SAE. We have both. So you can get something like that and replace it pretty easy if you have it. We got that at Princess Auto. Pretty cheap. So now what we'll do is get the float back, everything, our little needle valve and our rod, get that back on, and then get our bowl back on. Okay, now we got our float and everything back on. So again, our little mark that we did with our little mark on the carburetor, we'll go and throw that on. And the that little gasket there for that's underneath that white plastic piece, that also serves as a seal for your sediment bowl. Carburetor's all assembled. Good way to check, make sure that your float and that your needle valve are working properly is hold it upside down and blow into it. You shouldn't hear anything. Flip it upside down and blow into it, and you should hear some air. Just like that. So that's it. This carburetor, good to go. Okay, so we had the Craftsman here flipped up, and we took all the nasty stuff, all the grass, dried stuff, twigs, sticks, everything. You should have seen it all underneath this machine, just completely packed in there. I'm surprised this thing never caught fire. All of that was pulled out of the underside of this thing. So now basically I'm just going to move this out of the way, and I'm going to take this and probably roll it back here behind the couch so that I got a little bit extra room. We got the deck all painted up. We hit it with some spray paint in the hard to reach areas. Then we hit it with Tremclad black rust preventative paint. You know, you guys can see just the sheer amount of pitting that's already inside of this. Like you guys can see there. Unbelievable. If this deck was left, I'd say another year without, doing what we did, it would have been rotted out, and they would have basically needed a new machine because, finding a deck for these are kind of hard. A little bit of Gorilla Tape here just to cover the cracks so that, if it's out in the rain or it gets wet, water won't get into the foam here, and then you sit on it and you get a wet friggin' ass, right? So yeah, we do that to all the seats. And the blades have been sharpened on this, and we undercoated the deck with some crown rust preventative, so this thing should be good to go. Now this is the only real bad spot on the belt. There's a little bit of wear on it, but just looking at this, it should work. If not, replacing a deck belt's pretty easy. There's a little chip there you can see by my thumb right there. All in all though, I don't think it needs a new deck belt, so we're not going to replace it. Basically what we're trying to do is get this thing to the point where it's running good, and then once we get it running good, then we could go and test out the drive, because that was the problem. Because the customer did say that they were pulling the log and then it quit out on them. And we were able to see that the drive belt just slipped off one of the idler pulleys, but we don't know if there's any other damage, so we have to get it running. Then we could test the drive. And if everything tests out okay, then we can put the deck back on, and this thing's ready to go back to the customer. And I was never able to clean this with the hose, so I got some shop towels into the intakes. What I'm going to do is take the compressor and blow out all of the fins you see in there, guys. All kinds of dirt build up in the cooling fins, and if you get that, see all that? Your engine will run hot, and you don't want that, because then it'll be burning oil, and you definitely don't want that. So I'm just going to go in there with a compressor, blow everything out, and then we'll get the car back on this. That's a little better. Okay, so we're ready to put our carburetor back onto our intake neck there. We got this piece here all cleaned up. It was filled with junk inside of there, and at the bottom there was a whole bunch of stuff in it. So now we're ready to put this back together. So, little gasket here, you're going to need that. But basically, you want to make sure to hook up your linkage. Again, it's going to be sitting like this, right? So this one's going to go down into that one right there, and then that's going to go into the choke lever on your carburetor. So I'll show you a shot of how that should look. And you're going to want to hook this up first, and then hook your carb up, because you won't be able to bend this once the carburetor is bolted onto the neck. It's going to look something like this. Intake neck, plastic spacer, carburetor. You got your linkage hooked up there. That works as it's supposed to. And you want to put your gasket and then your studs. The studs bolt on top of that gasket. And just to be clear, looking at the front of this, which is, this is to the front of the machine now. You want to have the L coming there, because that's where your choke cable hooks in, so that when you pull it this way, it closes your choke. And then when you open it up, just like that, guys. Using our E5 socket, tighten those studs back up. Then you can go ahead and get your plastic 90-degree neck on, and then the nuts on top of that. Should have something that looks like that. So now we'll bolt, we're going to have to hook our linkages up first, back onto the machine, hook all of our springs up, basically the opposite way that you took it apart. So if you did a step, do it the opposite way. I'll take you guys through it. Then we'll get these bolted up. Not going to use red Loctite. I do not like it, but because there was some Loctite on it, that leads me to believe that maybe the manufacturer did it to prevent these intake bolts from loosening off, maybe due to vibration from the V-twin engine. So I will be putting some blue Loctite, which is not as strong as some red. Okay, and before we get any farther, this is our throttle linkage that goes down back to your governor, and you're going to want to put your spring back onto there. It's got a small end, and then it's got a little bigger end onto it, and your small end, that goes right up there, clips over. You're going to want to put your linkage through the spring first. So it should look something like that, guys. Get your spring, put the linkage through it, hook up your small end there, and then this end here, that'll hook onto the governor arm on the machine. Okay, so we got our carburetor. We're sitting right in front of our machine. The steps that you did last when disassembling, you're going to want to do first when reassembling. So like I said, we're going to hook up this throttle linkage and spring back to the governor arm right there. You can see pretty clear, guys, the linkage goes into the big hole and the spring goes into the small hole. I'll remove our shop towels there. Also, that little tube there, that's your overhead valve breather, and that goes into that hole right there. Just make sure that it's clean and that there's no debris on it. There is a little bit, so I'm just going to wipe that down with a shop towel, probably one of these that I take out, and then we'll be able to pop that in. Like I said, get the linkage hooked up, and then just get a couple bolts in snug so that it doesn't move anywhere. So we got our linkage and our spring hooked up, and now we're going to plug in our fuel solenoid with the cable there. Just pop that in, guys. Then next we'll take our fuel line and hook it up to the fuel intake. Don't forget to hook up your fuel line clamp. And we got one bolt in there just to hold things on so it doesn't keep falling over. We got our other bolt here. You don't need much, guys. Like I said, I'm just using blue. Got a little bit on there. I'll get this one in, then I'll go for the bottom ones. Again, getting them all snug, making sure that this thing is straight and that nothing's getting warped, and you just want to go little by little, tighten that one, then tighten the one over there, then tighten the one down under there, and just keep going at it, guys, until you get them all nice and tight. So now that we got all that hooked up, all of our intake bolts are tight, we're going to come down here and we're going to hook up our choke cable. Okay, and once you have that hooked up, you're going to want to go up and test it out. So using our choke knob here, pull it, make sure there's no binding, and you can see fully operational choke lever. So now what we're going to do, you guys see that tiny little piece of foam right in there, that little sponge. We're going to hit that with a little bit of lube. You could use WD-40, you could use Release All, anything you want, but that just basically makes sure that that is always lubricated so that it doesn't bind up. And because we got the shroud off, I was going to check the armature air gap on both coils. Because there's two coils on this one and not just one, if you have one set improperly or one that has more spacing than the other, you're going to get a different spark in each cylinder, and you definitely don't want that. So what we got here is a set of feeler gauges. You can see up here, 0.010, so that's 10,000ths of an inch. These machines, they say the armature air gap, which is the gap in between the coil and the magnet, you can see right there, specifies at 8 to 12 thousandths of an inch. So we're going about half of that with the 10 thou. And guys, basically it's simple. You just want to make sure that you can slide that in and that there's no real binding. And you want to be able to do that. And just for me to point out, you don't want to check it over here. You want to check it where the magnet is. So you check this one and then you rotate your flywheel until the magnet is at the other post. And then you could go ahead and check that one as well. That one checks okay. Again, another thing that I want to point out is you never rotate your engine counterclockwise, guys. Always rotate it in a clockwise position. That's how the engines are supposed to run, so that's what you do. So we've rotated it clockwise. We'll come over here, check this side. That side checks okay. Rotate it to about there. Check that side, and that side's good as well. And this is a good time to show you guys, while you got your shroud off, rotate this and try to bring your gear here up as much as possible. Go under there, hit that with a little bit of lube. That'll go a long way for your starter. Okay, next step is getting our big shroud back onto place. That's these bolts right here. And we're going to be putting those bolts, again, all around. We'll get that shroud back on. I'm also going to charge the battery, and we need to drain the gas tank. You guys can see here's a fuel level right there. Right in there. Not sure if you guys can see it or not. There's a fuel tank there. It does have a full tank of fuel. The only problem is this fuel was from last year, and I don't want to run old fuel on a perfectly clean carburetor. If this carburetor was real easy to take off, sure, I'd put some octane boost into that fuel tank and then run it and try it. And you know, if there was a problem, okay, then you take the carb off, and if you got to clean it out again, it's no big deal. But this, you got to take the shroud off, and you got to do all this work. So I'm not going to chance it. So what we're going to do is we're going to drain the gas tank, charge the battery, and get this shroud on. So this part's pretty easy, guys. On this shroud, you see these little notches right there? They're going to line up with little studs basically on our plastic carburetor neck. So these little plastic fins here, not studs, but plastic fins, they slide into that upper casing. So you're going to want to line those up. Then you want to come over to the side of your machine and make sure that this metal plate is on the inside, right? Inside of this plastic piece here. Something like that. Now, don't push one side down too far, because it'll end up being like this, and when you go to put the other side on, it won't go on that easy. So you kind of want to go little by little by little. Okay. Same on this side. You might have to play around with it a little bit. We're going to push that in, and that should seat right there, and then now we can just do a little bit of fine tuning, lining up bolt holes and whatnot. Once you have your side plates inside of this top cover, come up here and push that down nice and flat. You can make sure that the flywheel still spins without any binding. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that little 1/4 inch screw, I'm going to put that in and just put it snug so that it's lined up, and I'll get all of our 3/8 bolts. So I'll get those in, I'll get them snug, and then we'll turn the flywheel and make sure that nothing's binding. Well guys, it's a sad day today. We lost a 1/4 inch socket. Man down. I had to replace it with one from a Stanley toolbox. I've lit a candle in vigil in hopes that the 1/4 inch socket will be returned to the safety of the toolbox. And though you may be replaced, you will not be forgotten. Now the only problem with that is it could be anywhere. Okay, so now that we've got our shroud on and all of our 3/8 bolts along the outer sides tightened up, we're going to go ahead and get our, I guess it's a fin guard. We'll get that tightened up, and then we'll get our new air filter installed, and we should be able to fire this thing up. Well, today's a joyous occasion. As I was cleaning up, as I always do after working, could it be? The 1/4 inch socket has returned to us. Return you to your rightful home. Using a 5/8 spark plug socket, we're going to take the spark plugs out now and make sure they're clean and gapped. Looking at our machine from this way, here's our left plug, here's our right plug. We got a little bit of sticks and stuff onto it. But basically, they look just about the same. However, one of the plugs has a slightly smaller gap than the other. So I'm going to gap these, make sure they're gapped to, I believe, 30 thou. I'll clean them up on the brass wheel and put them back. This takes a RC12YC plug. One plug here, that gaps out at about 30 thou. Got our other plug here, that one gaps out at about 26, 27. So I got to open this one up a bit. So the engine's basically done. I have to wait to get an air filter. We got that on order. So I'll have a brand new air filter and pre-filter. I'll also go in here and clean up any of the dust that's in there. Spark plugs are gapped at 30 thou. We're also going to be changing the fuel filter. Like I said, we'll be draining the fuel tank as well. And then I'm going to let it sit tonight with the battery on charge. Okay, we got our new air filter installed with the pre-filter underneath it. On this model of engine, the air filter sucks the air from underneath. So that's why your pre-filter goes on the bottom there, and then your air filter on top. We also drained the fuel and got a new fuel filter on there. We'll be able to install our deck, and that'll be it, guys. Oh, she runs like a charm, boys. Runs like a charm. So that's all it needed was carb clean and new fuel filter there. So we'll let this run for a little bit longer and heat the oil up, and then we're gonna pull the oil filter and drain the oil. Okay, so we got the engine warmed up now. There's your part number for our oil filter. We had one of the longer ones, but this one takes the little shorty, so we're gonna put OEM stuff on it. And then right here, guys, there's your oil drain tube. So they have a special connector. You pop that little cap off, you put a tube right over it, and then it doesn't make a mess all over the place. So as soon as we find that, we'll show you how it works. We also put some air in the tires. We got, I believe, 10 psi in the back and 12 psi in the front. Okay, and then using just a clear rubber tube. So you pop this tube here on, and then you rotate it to the left just until oil starts coming out of your tube, and then once all your oil is drained, you come back here, you twist that to the right, it tightens that up. You can pull your tube off and then put your yellow plastic cap back on there. Should be good to go. And before you put any oil filters on your machine, guys, you want to prime them. So you got to fill these things with oil first. Normally I fill them just up to about here, let them sit, and let the filter inside absorb that oil. And then take a little bit of oil on your finger, rub it around the gasket on the outside, and that'll prevent this from chafing and ripping when you tighten it onto your machine. And using our Castrol GTX 10W30, not sure if you guys are going to be able to see it in there, but we do have some oil in there. We're just going to run it around the sides, make sure that foam filter inside of here gets well coated and it absorbs the oil. And again, just take a little bit of oil on your finger, rub it around that gasket. You don't want that much. Just need a little bit, guys. And that'll prevent your gasket from ripping when you tighten your oil filter on. You guys got to pre-soak your oil filters. So just imagine that this would soak up about 2 to 4 ounces of oil. And let's say you didn't pre-soak your oil filter here. What's going to happen is you're going to put this oil filter on. You're going to install it. You're going to put, you know, how many milliliters or liters of oil your machine takes. And then you're going to check your oil level, and let's say you're at the full spot and you're right at level, and then 15 minutes later when this absorbs that extra 3 or 4 ounces of oil, now you're going to be low. So you always want to pre-soak these, guys. And to remove old oil filters, instead of doing it by hand, we use just like a Mastercraft boa constrictor. Basically it's just a rubber strap and gives you an extra bit of leverage. Now some of these oil filters, guys, they're going to have these little ridges you see there. Now that's for an oil filter socket, so you can put an actual tool around that that's used for tightening and loosening, but I advise against it because you never want to tighten these up too much. Okay, so with the oil draining, we ended up taking a little bit of fresh, clean oil, putting it into the dipstick, and then a couple seconds later, it drains out here. That's just a little bit of a flush, just so you get all of the little bits of oil at the bottom of the engine out. Now, right on the sticker on the inside of the hood, it says this machine takes 64 ounces of oil. So that's, I'm guessing that's plus or minus whatever the oil filter takes. So we're going to close that up at the bottom there and install our new oil filter first, and then we'll add our 64 ounces plus or minus a little bit. And once you get your oil level pretty close to where you want it, you want to fire this thing up, let it run for a little bit. You could drive it around if you want, and then check it again maybe 5 or 10 minutes after, just to make sure that the oil filter doesn't absorb any more oil, which would give you a lower oil level than what you had before. Okay, so we got the machine parked outside. I haven't put the hood on yet, but that's no big deal. You guys can see that it snowed, which is crazy because it was nice and sunny yesterday. But anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to slide the deck in from this side, and I'm going to show you what we're going to hook up first. So you guys remember that spring for the blade engage? So we ended up zip tying that to just the back here, so that when we were pushing it around, it didn't get caught up underneath the wheel and, you know, rip or tear nothing. So I'm going to clip that off, and we're going to hook that up first. So you guys can see, nothing really fancy. Just a little bit of undercoating on there, and we did sharpen the blades. Here's a little before and after clip for you guys. Check that out. And we got that string out of there. You know, I just used the dolly to cart this thing around. Too heavy to carry by myself. So anyways, I'm going to flip this thing up and get it under the machine. Okay, so we got our deck down on the ground now. You're going to want to make sure that your bars, both bars, are facing forward, and that your belt is routed in the right direction, and that nothing's binding. And like I said, guys, the first thing we're going to do is take this spring right there, and we're going to hook it onto that hole there, and that's what runs your idler to tighten your belt and engage your belt. So we're going to hook that spring into that hole, then slide the deck a little bit farther in underneath the machine. Then we can go ahead and hook this plastic piece right into its stopper right there. Now the only thing that I would like to add is that you're going to want to make sure your blade engage cable goes around the outside of that piece there. So you're going to have to slide your deck in quite a ways to the point where that'll have enough slack on it so that you can hook your spring in. So we got our spring hooked in, we got that piece on there. I'm just going to leave it loose for now just until I get everything secure, and then I'll go ahead and put the cotter pin, you know, that just pops in like that, and then you put that plastic piece that you see hanging on the cable, you put that snug up against the back of there, and then you pop a cotter pin over top of it. Okay, so now what I've done is gone ahead and laid out all my stuff that I need. So I got my retaining pins and my washers. I got one down there for the front rod. I got my rod laying there. And then again on this side, I have my 2 retaining pins and my 2 washers. So now what I'm gonna do is I'll push this rod through the hole right there, and we'll get that hooked up first, and that'll set our depth of the deck. And before we hook up that rod, you're gonna wanna hook up your deck belt, because again, you're gonna have to pull your deck forward a little bit so that you got enough slack on the belt to get it up around that pulley right there. Once the deck belt's around the engine pulley, we'll go ahead and pin that rod into the hole in the deck. Good time to point out that you guys wanna make sure that your belt is inside of that little loop. Same on the other side. Again, we got nice tension on the belt. Then go ahead and pin it. Then you can move the deck back, and you'll know that that's as far back as you can go. Now comes time to center your deck at the back, and basically you just want to line these up to the pins or the little rods that stick out of the frame here. So again guys, that just slips up and over, but there's a cable here and I don't want to pinch that, so I'm going to pull the cable out. You guys want to make sure that nothing's pinching in there when you go to put those on. Just like that guys. Now I still have the deck in the highest position, so what I'm going to do now is go to the other side, hook up this rod here, and once we got both of those done, then we can lower our deck lever and hook up the back ones. Okay, and on the other side, same thing. We got that hooked up now, and I'm not sure if you guys can see it or not, but we did put our pin through on the other side there. So now what you want to do, go ahead, lower your deck down, well, lower your setting down anyways, to its lowest position, and then we can hook up these bars back there. Again, this is why I love working on Craftsman's. Super simple stuff guys. Like I said, you just line that up, slip it over, put your washer on, your retaining spring, and you're good to go. Just like that. Same on the other side as well. And just like that guys, our deck is installed. So now I'll go ahead and put the hood back on. Again, you just got to line it up to that 90-degree point, drop it in, close it, and that should be it. We also greased up our steering linkage. A couple grease nipples right there. We packed those full of grease, so it's good to go. Now that we got our hood on, we can go hook up our lights right there. Just plug those in, and then now's a good time to just check your oil again. You know, you guys want to check it every time before you start it on every machine, whether it be a little push lawnmower or a big riding lawnmower. You always want to check your oil guys before you're firing these machines up. And like always, we got a tester out, a little bit of choke. This thing runs awesome. Friggin' nice. There you have it guys. That's everything you need to know about how to tune up on a YS4500 Craftsman riding lawnmower. So if you enjoyed the video, leave me a like, think about subscribing, and I'll catch you in the next one. Be sure to click here to subscribe and click here for my latest video. And as always, thanks for watching guys.